for tech startups across Asia and the Pacific. And we have a fabulous group of speakers here this morning who will be talking about cloud and what it does for the digital economy and the startups that are powering it. And so without further ado, I want to hand over to the chief of the Digital Technology for Development Unit of the Asian Development Bank, Thomas Abel, to give some brief opening remarks, and then we get started with the webinar.
Great. Thanks, Arndt, and thanks everybody for joining, and thanks for the panelists for participating in our launch event today. And this event is part of a series that we are promoting on cloud computing as an important driver of development in Asia and the Pacific. And we previously published a report on how cloud computing enables governments, and had quite a good reception to that. And this paper is a little bit more subtle. We wanted to focus on tech startup ecosystems, which we think is a very important component of the emerging digital economy across Asia and the Pacific. We all know there are some very strong tech startup hubs and tech startup activities in the region, and we're trying to do many different things to foster ecosystems across the region, not just in the current hubs, but in every country. And we're very lucky. We have launched this year ADB Ventures, and we have Sherwin Pu, who's the head of ADB Ventures, joining us today as well to give his perspective. And tech startup ecosystems are something that governments really have to work at to make successful. And there are so many different approaches. We have a tremendous amount of demand from governments when we do events in this area. And we really wanted to focus this paper on cloud computing because the startup ecosystems themselves really understand this, that cloud has enabled an explosion of startup activity. But governments don't necessarily understand that, especially in our region where there are so many different, policies and confusions about what cloud services actually mean, that sometimes governments can miss this point that, when you talk about most of the tech startups, they're built on top of cloud computing, and the skills and the relationships and the services are kind of a whole new set of stack of capabilities that need to be learned, and many people in government just haven't gotten there yet. So we really wanted to make sure this report focused on what we think is a very important enabler, and we also will continue to work with our developing member governments across all the many angles that are required for promoting tech startup ecosystems in the region. And so I would like to thank again the panelists for participating today, and all of the participants. And we're looking forward to having very good opportunity for question and answer after the panelists have their presentations as well. So I'll hand it back to you, Arndt, for the next stage. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Thomas, for those remarks. And you'll be facilitating later, which we hope will be a very active and engaging discussion with the audience. So please remember that you can, during the entire webinar, add your questions in the Q&A function of Zoom, and we'll do our best to respond. All of our speakers are going to get involved as well, and we'll have some time to discuss at the end. Now, we're also keen to know who has joined us today. We didn't ask you much information in the sign up, but we would love for you to tell us what type of organization you are from. So we're going to launch this poll now while I introduce our lead author of the report and our first speaker. And that is May-Ann Lim, and she's a director at Access Partnership Singapore and the executive director of the Asia Cloud Computing Association. She has extensive experience in public policy, technology development, and government relations, communications across Asia and the Pacific, and has worked with many global, regional, and local organizations such as APEC, ASEAN, the Pacific Economic Cooperation Council, and the Asia Internet Coalition on thought leadership development, government outreach, and stakeholder engagement efforts, such as the development of the ASEAN ICT Master Plan 2020. Mei-Ann's career has spanned global, regional, and local institutions, including the World Bank, World Vision, and the Singapore Institute of International Affairs, as well as the Singapore Internet Project. Based in Singapore, Mei-Ann also lectures on Infocom policy at her alma mater, the National University of Singapore. And in the context of our project here, she was our lead author. So we are very happy to again feature you with key insights of the report. Over to you, Mei-Ann. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Arndt. Sorry, everybody, that your morning got destroyed by that extremely boring recital of my CV, but thank you so much for having me here. As all of you know, we are talking about cloud computing as a key enabler for startups. Now, first things first, we have Q&A. Let me tell you, Arndt loves Q&A. Arndt loves it. Arndt loves typing. Arndt loves responding to your questions and answers. So if you've got questions that I'm raising, please don't ask me, please ask Arndt, okay? Because when I'm speaking, I can't type, okay? So Arndt will answer all of your questions, appropriate and inappropriate questions as well. So please, if you do have questions, ask them. I also do have, I want to point out that I'm not alone in this panel. It's not just me and Arndt and Tom. I do have Janine as well, who is from startups. So if you have any questions about startups, please ask her. I've got Digby Joy, who is from AWS. If you have any questions about why is my AWS bill so high, please ask him and he will answer you. I don't know whether that's true or not, but he'll ask you. And of course, Sherwin, who is also part of ADB, who is also, if you want to say, hey, how can I actually get a grant, maybe could we speak about enabling programs? I think Sherwin, Tom, and Arndt are going to be talking about it. But okay, first things first, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be telling you about this paper that we wrote. This is to save you time so that you don't need to read the paper. Ta-da! Okay, so please listen to what we're doing here. Let me share my screen and let me just go straight into this. This is cloud computing as a key enabler for startups. Really strange thing here. We have a bunch of research that we went out and done. We did, and the interesting thing about startups is that they don't actually need to be told about cloud computing. And Janine will probably agree with me on this. A lot of startups are already on cloud computing. They're actually very, very much cloud native companies, and that's a very great thing to be. We often have a little bit of difficulty differentiating between what's a startup and what's a micro, small and medium enterprise. We have a little bit of a definition here, but we want to focus on the fact that the startups are actually, they tend to foster innovation a lot better because there is a very, very fast-paced business model that they're working towards, whether you succeed or whether you fail quickly. And this is the thing that which differentiates between the more traditional SMEs, which tend to be a little bit more risk averse. So you can see the slide, the images that I have on the side that give you a bit of a rundown on what we think are some of the differences. But I do want to flag this because there is sometimes, especially when you're dealing with government enablement programs, there is sometimes a bit of a conflation between the two groups, and you're often looking at it and thinking, okay, this is an SME, but they're sort of like a startup, but they're not really so think of startup as a phase, because in many instances, some SMEs, some small and medium enterprises, because of a generational change, they actually move from being like a 20-year-old SME to a startup mechanism because the younger son took over, for example. So I just want to lay this out there, that I'm not just making a semantic difference here. You can read a lot more about it in our report, but I just wanted to call this out because it does affect categorization for public policy. Now, the next slide tells you a little bit about where I think the contributions of startups are in terms of, we always look at it in terms of where startups contribute to the economy, where startups contribute to employment. That's all fine. I've got statistics here that you can have a look at. We have interesting findings from the ecosystems within Asia, and I think that in terms of Asia Pacific, we're actually pretty good in terms of our global startup ecosystem standing. You can see Tokyo is number 15, Seoul is number 20, Shenzhen is number 22, Hangzhou is number 28, and then Melbourne number 30, etc. So we've got a couple of pretty good standings when it comes to the startup ecosystem. So, good for us. All of us are really strong in where we are with enabling our startups. And we see them as, well, everybody actually sees them as pretty powerful enablers of digital transformation. Now, what's the value proposition for cloud solutions and the startups ecosystem? Again, I think I'm preaching to the choir here. I think in terms of having an on-premise system, there's a lot of costs involved. There are a lot of, not just costs, but in terms of monetary, but in terms of just time and energy you spend in thinking about making sure that your systems are up to date and secure. I think that's the core thing for everybody. But if you're hosted on the cloud, then you really don't need to think about this thing. You just outsource to your cloud vendor. Not that you don't think about it, because there is shared responsibility that you need to make sure that you're aware of, but you actually pretty much can they can take care of a lot of the pain in running your own infrastructure. I've got a couple of case studies for you. If in case you're wondering where can these benefits accrue to, you can see in Indonesia, we've got IOPOP in terms of their automated services that they managed to pretty much expand their operations pretty easily. We've got Korea's Kamong and Singapore's Shopback as some of our case studies. Our paper is full of case studies. So if you're wondering, hey, how can cloud enable the startup community? Lots of case studies there. These are just 3 that I wanted to pick up. And I'll skip this, but I just want to come to our core question. And this is the core question for this particular paper and this core question for our presentation today. We know that many cloud startups are cloud native. And again, I encourage you, ask Janine about this. Many cloud startups are born in the cloud. In fact, a lot of the founders are, people from cloud companies who have decided that they want to start their own thing and they come out. There are definitely critical resource constraints with startups. You've got staff issues, you've got training issues, capacity issues, financial issues. That's all part and parcel, I believe, of starting up any sort of business. The core question actually doesn't lie with the startup community itself. Although I do think that if you are part of the startup community, I do see that there are some people in our audience who are actually part of the startup community. If you are part of the startup community, I would love to hear the same question, how can we create a better, stronger ecosystem for you? But the core question that we asked ourselves within this paper is how can we as governments, how can we as public policy makers create that better ecosystem for the startup community? How can we have a better environment for nurturing innovation? And where we got to was 6 suggestions, which are listed in the bubbles below. Firstly, designing infrastructure, policies, encouraging education, leading by example, supporting startups directly and indirectly, laying the groundwork for expansion, and evolving context-aware data privacy and cybersecurity policies. I'm going to go through, for the rest of the presentation, I'm going to go through these one by one, just to explain what exactly that we mean so that you know what we're talking about. Firstly, we have to make sure that we design and enable policies focused on digital infrastructure. This will mean that in the first instance, yes, the inverted commas, the boring thing of internet connectivity, and we have to make sure that that is in place. So I won't belabor the point. I think that internet connectivity is fairly important. Everybody understands it. I've got an example in the paper here that it's the Indonesia's Palapa Ring project that basically tries to connect the whole of Indonesia. And you can see that obviously as an archipelago, Indonesia is quite tricky in terms of making sure that everybody's connected, but we have to try to make sure that everybody's online. The other thing to do with the digital infrastructure is actually other types of policies and related policies that will support a ecosystem. Let me give you an example. In Papua New Guinea, there is a problem for digital payments because people in Papua New Guinea, and it's not unique to Papua New Guinea, people don't have digital identity. People don't have an identity card, for example. People aren't given an identity card in like what happens in most of the countries. And this is a problem because when you want to start talking about digital authentication and I'm paying you, well, yes and no. There are certain rules and regulations in financial in the financial sector which require me to know who I am, who you are, so that we can authenticate, so that we can pay. And it all starts with digital identity. And that's what DigiZen is actually doing as a project, trying to make sure that everybody in Papua New Guinea actually manages to get a digital identity. So the infrastructure has to be in place and the governments have to be working on this in order for startups to be able to benefit from this great ecosystem. Because if you don't have this in place, what you're going to get is little pockets of innovation, which aren't going to be expandable. You're not going to be growing any of these ideas out because you hit always a barrier to growth once you get there. And it's not something which the startup itself can work towards improving. It's a government issue. It is a whole of nation issue, like, for example, digital identity. So that's number one. Number two, I think I won't belabor this point. I think really important to have encourage in educational institutions to teach and leverage cloud-related skills and cloud-related platforms. My brother is a computer programmer, and his school gave him space, obviously, to do programming, and they were on a particular platform. And I thought that they didn't monitor what the students use it for. So I know that my brother was programming computer games on that, and he's now a computer game programmer. So it's always good to give people the space to think about things. And I think that education definitely can be in nurturing a lot of startups, nurturing a lot more people who have the ability to think laterally and use the technology. So you got to leave the Lego pieces on the table so that people can use and think through what they could possibly do with these tools, and therefore improve the quality of talents available for startups. The third thing that we want to see is that governments lead by example. We love to see things like Bahrain's cloud first policy. We have a whole bunch of other cloud first or cloud by default policies, which have emerged throughout the region. I think governments can support their startups by knowing what is it that they're supporting in the first instance, which is please use cloud computing. We're also using cloud computing. Why don't you just join us? And that's always a great place to be. The other thing is that obviously to support the tech startups directly and indirectly, a lot of incentives, a lot of cloud-ready infrastructure that can be always given away, supported directly or indirectly or through partnerships with private corporations and private cloud service providers. I think that that's really, really useful for people to be leveraging on and growing the startup community. Laying the groundwork for startup expansion and growth is the fifth suggestion that we have. There are quite a number of digital economy agreements which have started to gain popularity and gain speed in. And I'm really enthusiastic and excited about this because this means that there is a lot more space for trade and a lot more space for growth for startups if they just don't want to just look in their own domestic country, or if they want to start in another country even. These digital economy agreements are definitely a way to go to pave the way for more collaboration, more innovation, more space to grow for startups. And finally, the idea of developing more context-aware data privacy and cybersecurity policy. Now, this idea of context-aware is pretty interesting because it's not just about making sure that everybody has to hold to a particular rule, but you have to understand the context in which startups evolve and startups are living in. So you don't just put in mechanisms, you actually speak to startups and say, okay, let's see where your cybersecurity policies and stances are. How can we help to make sure that it's properly tailored and it's tailored for you, and you're able to move it up and down depending on the type of startup, depending on the size of the startup to it. We have a lot of discussions which are going on right now on data governance, data management, control mechanisms, for example, GDPR, or different standards that are available. We need to be aware that there are different technology policies which are available, like zero trust policy. What exactly is a zero trust policy? Sounds very scary, but you need to understand that. And we need to take a risk-based approach. So assessing the risk and measuring that against the companies and your own risk tolerance as a government, where exactly, how can we tailor, how can we taper all of these policies to make sure that they are fit for use for the startup community? So that's the 5 things that we have that are covered in the paper. I'm very, very happy again to answer your questions, and really encourage you to drop your questions into the question and answer. And right now I'm going to turn the time back to Arne. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Mayan. That was, again, a whirlwind of information. And of course, if you felt like that went too fast or you want to go deeper into it, the paper is available online. And we will also make sure that all of you who joined today get an email later with all the material, all the video recording, and a link to the paper again through email. So just wanted to note that. Allow me to introduce the first of our respondents. We have 3 today with different perspectives. And the first one is, of course, from a startup. So welcome, Janine. Janine Teo is the CEO of Solve Education, an education technology not-for-profit with the mission of delivering quality education to everyone, focusing on the bottom of the pyramid demographic. She's the first Asian to receive the International Intellectual Benefits to Society Award by Mensa International. And Janine is also a member of our ADB Digital Technology for Development Advisory Group. She's a fellow of the University of Pennsylvania Global Social Impact House. And Janine believes that education is the key to solve the many challenges we face in the world today. Because of this, she's an avid speaker on topics like education, edtech, gender equality, and poverty alleviation. We're glad you had time in your busy calendar to join us. Over to you, Janine, and we look forward to your comments on what we presented and your perspective on startups and cloud.
Thank you, Art, and thank you, Mayan, for such an energetic presentation. So today, there are actually pre-pandemic, there are 260 million children and youth who do not go to school, and majority of them are based in Asia. So that's exactly what the demographic that Solve Education is focusing on. So just to give you all a little bit of a background, we have kind of 3 main products. One is our educational game app, and another one is our chatbot, and both are designed to teach these marginalized communities. And we also have a third product, which is our learning analytics, because we believe that data really drives how we improve the way that we teach, and also inform our partners and stakeholders in terms of the impact, the learning outcomes that their students are learning with, are getting through learning with us. So apart from the paper, I thought a more important or a more helpful way is perhaps to share my journey as a tech founder and my relationship with cloud computing. Like Mayan rightfully pointed out, a lot of the tech startups are cloud native, and we are one of them. And just for all just to give you an idea, right? When startups build that system, build their companies at the start, right? And just like even short back, Henry, the founder, is a good friend of mine, and we actually started everything kind of together, right? And we will meet on a monthly basis to share notes. So all of us really start with a very small team, and if we weren't kind of depending on cloud computing, what that means is that we will need to set up our own storage system, our own computing power, and that requires an additional expertise, additional headcounts, which tech startups right at the beginning do not have the resources to do. So, and by depending on cloud computing services like AWS and others, right, we are able to just leave it up to the experts and focus on, really finding our product market fit. And that is really the most important thing for tech startups right at the beginning. And following that, right, once we found our product market fit, when we move on to our next stage, which is scaling. So, and for Solve Education is when we went out of Indonesia and scaled to, India, Africa, or, the Philippines. So with cloud computing really brings about the ease of scaling. So we don't really need to think so much about needing to set up, a lot of different additional work. Rather, we hand, again, this scaling part to the experts, which are our cloud computing partners, right, to take care of. And while we focus on our go-to-market strategy and how do we drive adoption, right? So having that kind of quote unquote outsourced really give us a lot more, unlock a lot more resources for ourselves to focus on improving our product, improving our customer service and rollout. So, and for us, for Solve Education, actually, we have a third, even more important reason why we depend on cloud computing, and that really is the audience, with regards to the audience that we serve. So because of the audience that we are serving are from the more marginalized communities, and I think all of you who are in developing countries can understand, their devices that they have access to are fairly low end, right? Be it computers or mobile phones. And with that, it's actually very important for us to design a very lightweight system so that it can run on lower end devices, it can run on very low phones with very low memory space. And what does that mean? That means that a lot of things will be stored in the cloud, right? And so that it's not so heavy on the device itself. And that's really why, we've created our chatbot product where, the interface is just a chat and all the content actually is on the cloud. So it takes up really very small storage space on the device itself, right? And with regards to other more complex things like our speech-to-text system, where we train our learners to speak English well, right? So imagine if we were to host this machine learning or AI system on a mobile phone, on low-end mobile phone, that's really close to impossible. But with cloud computing, taking the, pulling the weight of computing, right, and sending down the kind of the minimum required information to the mobile phones, really unlocks so much more things that people can do with their phones. So with that kind of computation load balancing, we are able to even train people to speak and improve their accents, right? We are able to compute such that people get the right materials to learn at the right time, so that their learning journey is more effective, and many other great things that would have otherwise been impossible if it was not outsourced. So yeah, I guess I will probably stop at that and welcome any questions. So today we are already we are running in 8 countries now, and it was really possible without, we only have one person looking after our backend system. So and that's really on because we kind of outsource a lot of things to cloud computing. And to the people here who are looking at adopting cloud or want to learn more about our journey, please do reach out. Yeah, thank you very much for having me.
Thanks so much, Janine. And what I really loved about your description was the many times you said that somebody was able to take the headache off me and do this for me, right? You provide a service, but there are things that you can actually give to somebody else who provides a service for you. And that person is next in line to speak. And that's Diggy from AWS. And I'm going to introduce Diggy now. Thanks again, Janine. And I'm sure we'll get some interesting questions related to your work. So Diggy is the head of the startup business development for the ASEAN region in AWS, and he helps startup founders from the journey, during the journey from the idea phase all the way to the IPO. He works closely with many of the region's hyper-growth startups as a mentor and advisor, supporting the AWS startup customers at every stage of their growth journey. He's a passionate angel investor and has 18 portfolio companies in that he has invested in. He's a former founder, a serial entrepreneur himself, and he has deep firsthand experience with the unique challenges and opportunities that startups encounter. Before joining AWS, he was a founding member of an innovation accelerator, Innovent, and served as the country manager during the early stages. He also founded online learning platform 10 Marks Education, where he led the go-to-market and marketing strategies from the launch until Amazon acquired the business in 2013. And Diggy holds an MBA in marketing from India's Management Development Institute, Gurgaon, and a bachelor's degree in economics from Delhi University Hansraj College. Over to you, Diggy, for your perspective on this topic of cloud and startups.
Oh, thank you so much. Very hard to follow Mian and Janine. I think fantastic perspectives. I think Janine has already done the sell job for me. So thanks, Janine, for that. But yeah, I think, just a couple of quick minute thoughts from my side, having been a founder myself. And of course, practically every day I talk to different startups, especially technology startups. I think the first part, which is also, I think, covered in the report, at least how we look at enabling startups as a cloud service provider, and some of the, at least what startup customers tell us, and we heard from one on this panel itself, is some of the, the value or the benefits that they get out of the cloud. And I'll just try to kind of maybe summarize a couple of key four, 5 points, which I hope will be useful for the audience. I think the first and very important one is agility. For startups to sort of constantly innovate and constantly to experiments, they obviously need to be very agile. And the cloud actually enables them to quickly, spin up resources in practically, a few minutes. So you could actually spin up thousands of servers in a few minutes. And if you flash back into sort of the previous times, you would actually have to go to procurement. You would have to actually put in, if you're looking at a local data center or on-premise setup, it would take 10 to 15 weeks. So imagine if you're launching as a startup a new product or service, you're actually 10 to 15 weeks just in terms of provisioning hardware and equipment. Forget about launching a new service or feature. So first is agility. The second reason why startups obviously are benefiting, and this is what we hear from our startup customers, not just because I'm representing a cloud service provider, is really around cost savings. Cloud services are incredibly cost effective and can quickly give startups access to computing resources as they need them on a pay as you go basis. And that's the key one. And I think Mian's report also talks a lot about that. It's, the whole model is you're really paying for what you use. And to the extent we say you should only pay for what you really need. And I will come to that. In fact, and I want to quote noted Silicon Valley VC Mark Anderson, who had actually said that, sorry, I'll make a plug for AWS, but had said the AWS cloud has helped to lower the cost of running a basic internet application from $150K a month to $1,500 per month. That's 100x difference. And when you multiply that at an ecosystem level, and when you look at even from a venture capital, I work with venture capitalists all day, bulk of your funding is not going towards IT hardware and infrastructure. It's actually going towards the product and the solution that the startup is going to build and develop. And that has a kind of a sort of a multiplier effect, because then they can actually solve the real world problems that are happening in a society right now. The third reason, which I say, is elasticity. So in the olden times, customers used to potentially over-provision, capacity to handle peak loads. There were examples shared on Shopback and some of the other examples of what used to happen if you have a sort of a large sale happening. So typically a company would be over-provisioning to make sure that the servers will not go down. None of that has to happen today with the cloud. You can literally scale up and down on demand, on the go. And if you don't need that kind of provisioning, or you don't need so many servers, you can immediately scale down. Of course, today cloud also offers things like auto scaling, which actually looks at, and you can actually model it out, which means depending on how much traffic or volume you're getting, the servers automatically scale up and down. So that's the elasticity for you. And the fourth, and I think the very important reason, which I mentioned earlier, it's linked to agility, is really about, for startups, it's all about innovating faster. It's really about going to market faster, launching new products faster, developing applications that can differentiate the business and transform customer experiences. And that is extremely critical because you are competing with some of the larger established businesses, and the cloud enables you to do that. In fact, even a lot of cloud-first companies which are on the cloud, even to launch new features or products, the cost has dramatically gone down, and they can launch an experiment. So what we say is that the cost of experimentation has actually tremendously gone down. And you launch a new service or you launch a new product, you do a POC. If the experiment works, you can scale up immediately and actually go global with the cloud infrastructure, which is globally available. If it doesn't, you can immediately scale it down. So the cost of experimentation is now becoming very, very low. And that has actually helped to democratize access for technology startups to get. And we talked a lot about, I think Janine mentioned, so what we say is it removes the undifferentiated heavy lifting from the startup and focus only on the product and innovation, and to kind of focus around that. Also, one very interesting example that we have is a very noted Indonesian startup, which is Sayurbox, which is focused on enabling farmers to sell direct, they produce directly to customers like you and me, through the marketplace and the kind of the technology thing that they've built. And the interesting part about that is, because you obviously have a lot of intermediaries in between a farmer to, let's say, farm to fork, as what we call it, right? And Sayurbox is trying to kind of make sure that there's a direct connection between the farmers and end consumers like you and me. And doing that, one very important aspect comes about is also forecasting. How do you actually forecast demand, right? And which is very important for farmers because it directly impacts their livelihood. It directly impacts how much, not only the margins that they'll get, but also forecasting on what are the crops they should be investing in. And that's where, again, the cloud comes. So the cloud is not just about, hey, help you build an application, help you build a website, but it has real world, it offers so many services and products which startups use. So for example, Sayurbox uses a lot of our AI ML services to actually forecast demand that will come about from the farmers, and that has a real world business impact on the farmers, not just on consumers like you and me. So the opportunity of the cloud is that, and of course, with at least with Amazon Web Services, we have 200 plus products and services that you can choose for. The second part, which I do want to drill a little bit more also when I talked about it, is cost. Now, cost is, while it's of course pay as you go, a lot of the cloud providers, we also offer, sort of a lot of incentives, and we offer credits to the startup customers. So if you're a small startup, you get, benefits of, in the case of AWS, it's the AWS Activate program, where, depending on certain tiers, and if you're part of some sort of partner, then you get access to credits. But more importantly, even when your credits expire, there's a lot of work that goes in terms of making sure that you're well architected, that you're cost optimized, that you are sort of making sure that you get the best out of the cloud. And it's not that once the credit expires, you get a shock bill, but you're actually building lean as you go up. So while you're growing and expanding your business, it's not necessary that your cloud costs are also going parallelly like that. So there are a lot of mechanisms and ways that we support our startup customers to actually keep their costs very stable and very low, and yet exponentially get the benefits of the cloud, the 200 plus services, get all the technology access, get all the agility to drive impact. So I'll stop there. I think, follow questions, but I can of course go on and on, but I know you gave me 8 minutes. So I hope I want to stick to time.
Great, thanks so much, Diggy. And one can tell the passion for your product, and really you demonstrate with all these different solutions on the cloud that for all these different technology areas that you can leverage. Although if you were to build a startup that can respond to all these, you have to hire talent every time. You have to do a lot of work actually to leverage these technologies. And by tagging on to cloud, you have access in a much more rapid fashion. Thanks so much for those inputs. And I want to hand over to Sherbin Pu, who is from ADB and who is the head of business development within ADB's private sector operations department, which also includes ADB Ventures. He has 20 years in investment banking, private equity, structured financing, and led dozens of landmark debt or equity finance processes covering a wide range of sectors: renewable energy, sustainable transportation, environmental protection, healthcare, modern agriculture, and logistics. Having served in ADB for more than 15 years, his professional experience is really all across Asia Pacific. And Sherbin's previous professional experience includes the Banque Paribas and ABN AMRO, and he graduated with an MBA from the University of Chicago. Over to you, Sherbin, for your perspective on cloud and startups.
Thank you very much, Ant. And I just want to share that I really enjoyed the passionate and the informative presentations by the previous panelists. It's really fantastic. I probably will share some of my views from an investor's perspective. My personal view is that cloud computing is the most revolutionary tool for the startups after the invention of PC, and it changed the whole ecosystem, the whole landscape, and changed the people's the way to start a business and look into the new business models totally differently. And it made a lot of previously, let's say, financially and technically impossible business opportunities possible now. And it lowered the bar to start our business very dramatically. So that's why I say that it's revolutionary. And at the same time, personally, I see that cloud computing is an ecosystem itself. And we should well recognize that cloud service provider is not cloud entirely. To a certain extent, they provide service, but at the same time, we should recognize, actually, particularly from the government, from policymakers' perspective, they should understand there are a lot of other infrastructure and other elements needed in order to provide good cloud service to the startups and to the ecosystem. Because in a lot of our developing member countries, you don't have robust internet connectivity. And if you don't really have robust internet connectivity, sorry, the cloud computing doesn't really work. And also, in some other places, we don't have reliable power supply. Of course, if there is no power supply, then I would say that the cloud computing is not going to be very effective. So that's why, from policy making's perspective, particularly in our developing member countries, it's really, I would say that a whole ecosystem building, even for the cloud service providing itself. I also want to add another point is just from the policy making side, just from the government side, they usually want to learn how to strengthen the ecosystem from their neighbors and from the other countries. What my personal view is that there are some good practice, but to a certain extent, I don't believe that there is a best practice, at least in the current environment. we can learn a lot from some like advanced economies, but each country has their own different or unique circumstances. So they really need to like, let's call like a learn by doing, and try to experiment and try to test. Then based on their own experience, gradually they can help to improve the ecosystem. I believe that ADB can play a big role in this space and help them to, I would say that, to screen out some unnecessary influences in the decision-making process, and try to help them to reach to some experienced players in the region, help them to get the first-hand experience about how to tackle some of the issues. Then the last point I also want to say is that from the ecosystem perspective, the government is a big part of that, and probably is one of the important factors in the whole ecosystem. Then in the policy making, I think the most important thing for the government is to have a continuous, balanced policy, not to have a kind of like sudden change or rush change. As you know that most of the startups are still very fragile. And if there is any shock from the policy side, then to a certain extent, these startups will have very difficult time to like in their business. So that's why I would say that based on the cloud computing and based on how to build the ecosystem in our developing member countries, personally, I see that the above points are quite important, can be for the government to consider in like on several aspects. Then, as I'm heading ADB Ventures, and also, you know, there are some previous speakers also mentioned that, you know, the audience could be interested to know a little bit more about us. I just make it very simple, and we are the investment arm of ADB to invest in like technology startups. We have already made quite many investments in our developing member countries. We are impact focused currently with strong climate and gender lens when we assess the projects. You can get a lot of information from our website, which I will put in the Q&A box later. I do encourage the startups and accelerators. We have different tools for different players in the ecosystem. Try to get in touch with us, and we will help you to probably look into the opportunities you want us to look into, and at the same time provide suggestions, advice to you as much as we can. So this probably a short presentation from me, and I probably want to leave more time to answer the questions from the audience. Thank you, and back to you.
Great. Thanks, Sherwin, and thanks all the rest of the panelists and our participants. If folks have questions, I know many of the questions have been answered, and I will just jump in with one quick follow-up question for Sherwin, since Sherwin was just finishing. So Sherwin, as you know, ADB Ventures is one of the most exciting new things happening with ADB, and I know your team is looking at hundreds of startups to decide where to invest to make the most development impact. And I wanted to find out, you know, when you're looking at startups, you know, I think you have invested in some cloud first startups, and just wondering, you know, how does that figure into your evaluation decisions on, you know, looking at startup, you know, how effectively they're using cloud, and then, you know, how can we learn from that when we're looking at, you know, how to foster ecosystems in the region?
Thank you, Thomas. Yeah, actually, we had let's say almost all our investments are using the cloud computing service, and as I said, that now for almost all the startups, it's a part of the I would say that the inputs or elements you cannot really ignore when you start your business and operate your business. Like my own investment career started a pre-cloud age, and I was just at the time a big component when we assess like use of proceeds is to look at, okay, you know, have you budgeted enough to buy the server, to buy the storage, and whether you can whether you plan in advance if the business is good. And to answer the questions that if the business is not good, whether you can still survive by investing so much hardware. So that's why I say that the cloud is really changed the investment practice quite dramatically. Now, to be honest with you, it's not a question we are going to ask anymore. Like, okay, how much money have you budgeted for your hardware? Because we know that, like, for example, AWS, Google, all this can provide a very reliable service to the startups. And also, you know, the cost is really, you know, a tiny percentage of the total money the company will spend like for the business. So, but in terms of when we look at the company, yes, I mentioned several elements. Like basically, it's a kind of the risk assessment. For example, if you run a business, which, for example, if it's a SaaS business, whether your cloud service is reliable and it affects the client, the customer satisfaction, it affects your revenue. So all this will be a part of our due diligence. But you know, as the other panelists and also Thomas, as you mentioned earlier, we are very comfortable about the development of the cloud service in this region. I think most of the players globally recognize that, okay, Asia Pacific has 2/3 of the population in the world, and in terms of you know, our startups, in terms of our technology, in terms of our technology, you know, innovations, we are definitely one of the leaders in the world, and that's why, you know, I would say that everyone focus on the growth, focus on the service quality in the Asia Pacific. It's good. It's really good news for the startups in this region. But come back to the policy, Thomas. Actually, you and I discussed a lot about this, and like some of I would say that it's some of the policy relate to data security, relate to the cloud service in some countries. I would say that probably need to be more friendly, or need to be more, I would say that consistent towards the startups. Just to use one example, some countries do require that all the operational data in the country to be stored in the country. It's sensible. We all understand why it comes from, but that this policy apply to all the countries, or can all the countries afford to build all these large-scale cloud systems in their own country or in each of the city? So these are something, you know, we really need to think about when we look at our business. For ADB, it's no matter from public sector operations or private sector operations. These are something we definitely need to consider, like I would say that in the future. Back to you, Thomas.
Great. Thanks, Sherwin. That's a good segue into my next question, which is also in the chat from Uni. And it's basically a question about how to deal with fragmented regulatory landscape. And I want to ask Janine, because you know, you're started in Singapore, you're working in 8 countries. How have you dealt with the different regulatory landscapes, as a small startup working in 8 countries?
Yeah, that's actually really a very good question because like Uni mentioned, right, most tech startup wouldn't have their dedicated compliance person. So we definitely plug into a lot of kind of knowledge sharing amongst the startups, right? So the startups who have already been in the country would, do some kind of knowledge sharing among all of us. Another way that we also do is to have so for us, we work with organizations like Trust Law, where there is compliance people, there are compliance experts that they are not on our team full time, but they do advise us in different compliance needs in different countries. And of course, also in our cloud computing partners who have experience in working in different countries that could give us some guidance. Now, it sounds really broad, right? But there are some industries that are a lot more regulated than the others. So my friends who are in the fintech startup, for example, or the medtech startups, right? There are a lot more, compliance metrics versus education technology, for example. And for fintech startups and medtech, I would say that you would need the founder, given because of the the nature of those sectors that are so much more regulated, right? Actually, there's no running away to be an expert in the regulations of the different countries that they are in. I would say that no startups is alone, right? There's an ecosystem around the startup. So either the incubator or peer networks would be very, very good resources to help, navigating the different regulations, I would say.
Great. Thanks, Janine. And I think we have time for one last question. And I wanted to bring this to Mayan and to Digi. Basically, a question about the universities. Startups are famous for, basically people coming straight out of university and jumping into this. And what do you think we should do? Because we do a lot of work with universities to try to revise their curriculums and support, innovation. What should they do to support startups that are going into cloud? I'm not sure if universities today are actually teaching, cloud technologies as part of their curriculum. I just haven't seen that. So what your perspective is on that?
Maybe, what do you think? I mean, are you guys working with people in university? I mean, I think that I've got lots of opinions about how university education must be reformed and changed, but you don't want to hear about me about that. So I'd like to hear, is AWS doing stuff like that? Because I think that there's a lot of, like my brother definitely got university AWS credits, but is there a lot of work being done in that sector?
Yes, there is actually. So we are globally, as well as in this region, we are partnering with different universities. I think the intervention is multi-pronged. So one is, of course, the easiest and the low-hanging one is if there are startups which are part of the entrepreneurship cells or incubators in universities, then of course there's a very clear partnership. We offer them mentorship and enabling them on the cloud and stuff like that. But even on the curriculum side, we have a full team, which is our educate team, our AWS education team, which is now intervening or trying to intervene even on the curriculum. So we've actually set out a sort of a curriculum intervention that is happening, getting the sort of teachers certified on AWS, students certified, on the cloud, intervening on the curriculum. So there is a lot of effort. A lot more is desired, I would say. But yes, there's a lot of activity that is happening on that side.
Looks like there's going to be a new type of alphabet. It won't be A for Apple and it won't be A for AWS.
No, but I would also say this, as we know, especially in this region, I think, all of us have to come together in terms of upskilling and enabling tech talent. And I think we are very happy and proud that we are definitely making a lot of investment in training across, and that starts right from the university level all the way upwards. So yeah, there is a lot of momentum work that at least we are trying to do, and so are other providers as well.
On my side, I'm actually really encouraged by a lot of the multidisciplinary moves that are being made by governments, by universities to relook at the curriculum and not just focus on the programming side of things, because you need to look at the programming, but also at the critical understanding of the architectures and the APIs and the interoperabilities which need to happen in order to build the whole entire ecosystem. To my point about if you want to enable startups, you're not just going to have to look at just amount of money that you're giving to startups, but looking at things like internet infrastructure and digital identity. You need to actually think outside of just the technology. So I'm glad to see that a lot of the curriculum is moving in that way. Again, lots more to say, but I'm going to hand the time back to you, Tom, because I know we're a little bit out of time.
Great. Yes, we are out of time. And I just want to thank everybody for joining. And just as a parting remark, just we're definitely interested in working with folks on how to promote the ecosystem in the region. We're going to continue to work on this and do more papers and host events and targeted investments and technical assistance. So please reach out if you have any follow-up questions. And thanks again, all of the speakers and to the engaged audience, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you. Thanks, Art, as well.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Great to have you all.